Podcasting from beautiful Leesburg, Virginia. Welcome to the Music Educator podcast, bringing you the latest tips, tricks, and practical advice you can use tomorrow. Here's your host and fellow music educator, Bill Stevens.
Welcome to the Music Educator podcast. My name is Bill Stevens, and I will be your host for today. In today's episode, Season 4, Episode 19, we're going to talk about what you should do after you play the flute. But before that, I want to take a moment to reflect and congratulate so many of my peers that have taken a tough situation with the COVID pandemic. They came back from virtual learning with a fraction of their programs, some just barely holding on to their jobs, and made some magic. They found the love of music. They shared it with their students. Students just performed so well. Kudos to everybody that's done that. And I'm with you with everybody that had a tough time this year. It was certainly something else, something that I don't think anybody in our lifetime has truly had to deal with. So kudos to all of you out there, and let's keep the show going. Let's build it up, and let's have a bright future for music education. Hey, music educators. I wanted to interrupt this part of the podcast because I have an exciting announcement, and I've decided to launch a membership program for this particular show where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. But it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I want you to be a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you the chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/the Music Educator podcast, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It'll take less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week and you like what you're hearing, visit glow.fm/the Music Educator podcast and support us any way you can today. What to do after playing the flute. The flute is an amazing instrument used in bands and orchestras all over the world. But what do you do after playing the flute? Do you just let it sit on a stand? Do you immediately put it in its case? Can you make the best recommendations for your flute students? Today, we're going to identify some recommended steps for post-performance maintenance of your flute. Take it apart. When you or your students stop playing, whether it is a performance, a rehearsal, or just practice, the moisture in a flute condenses. This creates a wetness inside the flute that can potentially harm the longevity of its usable life. By drying the flute, it will allow the pads to last longer and prolong the usable life of the flute. You are going to need to dry each section of flute separately. Start by disassembling the instrument and placing it in its case. And in some cases in which a flute may be new or old with dents, the instrument may be difficult to take apart. In this case, be sure not to grip the rods and pull so hard that you might damage it. Be careful not to use oil or grease, and never ever use tools like pliers to pull it apart. In this case, find a towel and wrap it around the flute. Carefully try to pull the flute apart with the towel. If it still doesn't work, then bring it to a flute technician. Use a cloth. Carefully consider what type of cloth you use to try to dry a flute off. Take your cleaning rod and wrap a lint-free cotton cloth around it. These cloths don't have to be fancy. You can find one at your local music store, or even use an ordinary handkerchief. Next, stick one of the corners of the cloth through the hole opening of the rod and wrap it around itself. The foot joint. Once you have wrapped the cloth around the cleaning rod, it is time to start to clean the foot joint. Start by pushing the rod and cloth through the foot joint a few times. The movement should be done in the same direction. As a word of caution, moving the rod and cloth in a back and forth motion may actually damage the pads. The body. Our next step is to dry the body of the flute. With this section of the instrument, you'll want to push the cleaning rod all the way in. You'll want to do this so that you can pull it out from the other end. Now worry not if the rod will not reach the end of the body of the flute. Just use your finger to push it in just a bit further. In addition, it is best that you do not hold the flute body in a way that puts pressure on the rods in the keys. This may bend them. Rather, always hold the instrument on its non-keyed end. The head joint. Finally, it's time to dry the head joint. Do this by pulling the cloth a bit further through the hole of the rod, which is often also called the eye. Then stick the cloth end of the rod into the head joint. Pull it out a little and carefully pull it out. You will want to rotate the rod, but it must be done in a gentle manner. It is recommended that you repeat this process and remember to pull, push, then twist. Repeat this process until the cloth reaches the stopper. And this is the cork portion of the head joint. Be careful not to push the stopper out of place. If you do this, it will disrupt the intonation of the instrument. Some tips. First, consider all of the germs and the microorganisms that live in your instrument's wet places. Be sure to wash the cloth off every so often. After a while, you'll notice it gets noticeably dirty. Next, the effectiveness of a cloth that has been washed multiple times is actually more absorbent than a new cloth. Consider this in your maintenance schedule. Remember, it is important not to store the cloth with the flute. This means inside the case and the instrument itself. You can also purchase different size swabs at your local music stores. These serve as alternative materials for cleaning out your flute. In some instances, you should consider using silk rather than cotton to clean your flute. This would make more sense if your flute is made out of, say, wood. Saving your pads. This whole concept of cleaning your flute after you play is a learned habit designed to save your pads. After you dry your flute, consider inserting and using a pad saver to absorb any unwanted moisture. These are like long, fluffy rod-like devices. Unfortunately, the drawback to these devices is that they may leave unwanted fibers within the actual flute, and as a result, tiny leaks may actually form. Instead of using pad savers as a replacement for a rod and cloth, consider using them in combination. Remember, the more often you dry your flute, the better chance that your flute will last longer. It doesn't matter if you played your flute for only 1 minute or for an hour. Moisture always condenses in the instrument. When dealing with the outside of the flute, consider wiping it down with a soft, dry, lint-free cloth, and never use a silver polished cloth. Remember, the daily objective is to clean, dry, and remove fingerprints from the instrument. Conclusion. In conclusion, the flute is a beautiful instrument that needs regular, daily maintenance. Directors and flautists need to understand that the life expectancy of their instrument is directly related to the condition of the instrument's pads. Moisture in the instrument is a necessary element that must be monitored. Proper instrument care will ensure a long and happy flute life. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Music Educator Podcast. It is a true pleasure to share this craft with lovers of music and educators like you. If you found value in today's episode, please feel free to leave a review and rate us on the Music Educator Podcast app, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcast aggregator. Also, please consider supporting the show by becoming an official Music Educator Podcast member or advertise with us on the podcast. Information for this can be found on the show notes. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you join us next time. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Music Educator Podcast. For the latest tips, tricks, and practical advice you can use tomorrow. You can subscribe to our podcast on every podcast aggregator or download the Music Educator app for free in the Apple or Google Play app stores. Furthermore, visit our blog at www.bandbuzz.org for additional music education resources. We will see you on the next episode of the Music Educator Podcast. And remember, music can change the world.